Welcome to Carmel. Welcome back. And this is a short recap. This is our intro. Original justice, reality ordered to God. Original justice, reality ordered to God. We're going to take you back to the beginning. Stay tuned and we'll dive deeper into this topic. All right, folks, we're going to talk here about original justice where reality is ordered to God. We touched on that on tape 8. We've skimmed the surface on some of that, and we're talking about another word for this original justice is our beginning, where your vocation began, the origin of it, and original justice, all ordered to the will of God. And that's what you're looking for today. You could be very calculating if you want. A lot of people will give you guides and talk about this or that, how to do this or that. But if you are looking for a closer union and the better quality of wine, it's the same thing about a better quality of experience with God, better qualities of unions. You'll want to discern God's will. And you'll want to do it not just in a general, but in a specific means, because the quality of your relationship has to do with the quality of your love, the quality of your experience, but above all, your happiness in the end. Your happiness. So if it's easy for you to default to a level of mediocrity, and you don't want to do mediocrity. It's easy in modernity to have what's called the tyranny of the possible. The tyranny of the possible, to do what's possible. Hey, you're looking for a closer walk to God. You got an idea that you can do this or that, and you might not have to work so hard, and you can put your life in neutral. That's not what we're talking about. That's what's possible. But say you feel called, and you don't know where you're called to, and you know that there's something out there, and you can almost image with that imagination that you're a man or a woman going along a wall looking for a crack in the wall, but you know you have this hunger and this desire. That is what this series is about, to kind of give you tools. I won't be able to give you an answer, but I can begin to give you tools, concepts that will help you discover where you're being led at, because some souls are being led with specificity closer to God, to do the will of God. And you'll know there was a time when creation existed, all tuned to the will of our Father. And so you have probably tasted butter and you can't go back to oleo. You've tasted butter. You've felt that niche. You have that hunger, and you are not equipped to accept mediocrity. You're not equipped to accept the tyranny of the possible. So you may, like Christopher Columbus, launch out. You know that you're not going to fall off the face of the world, but you know there's something out there. You don't know how long you have to go. You don't have to go north or south, but you know there's something more out there that you're being called to. And your intellect is darkened. There is a hunger in your will and in your memory. It's being sparked that what you have presently is not where you're to be at tomorrow or in the future. So we have the intellect, the will, and the memory, and you're looking at that, and you know in your intellect you have the capacity to do more, to experience more. Your intellect tells you that there's options out there that may be open to you that you haven't discovered, but your intellect, you've seen people who have found their niche in life, and you're still searching. And in your memory is the seed of hope, and where you're in your memory, you're hoping in things that you don't fully understand and that puzzles you. That's what this is about. It's the spiritual life. It's mysticism. It's a mystery. You're moving into an area where concepts can only take you so far, and you're moving into an area ultimately where God will infuse the answer. He will infuse the knowledge, but He's preparing you. He's preparing you as a fire prepares a green stick of wood. It first transforms it by the fire is going to give its attributes to the wood, but as it begins to approach the wood, it burns, and the sensation of God is not that good. The wood responds with hissing. The wood responds with smoke. Then eventually the wood dries out, and then and only then does it catch fire. So God's nature is diffusive, and God is attempting to share his nature, both his essence and his operations, with creation. And he is like in the Bible, knocking on the door. But it's confusing to you. It can be frightening to you. And nobody understands when you go and talk to them. Nobody understands. And they're polite and they listen. That's what this is about. This is about welcome to Carmel. This is about Carmelite spirituality. It's about mystical theology, ascetical theology, and ultimately we're going through just the basics for beginners, something for the advanced maybe once in a while, and those who are far advanced, they may be bored. Hang around, we might be able to help you. But right now I want you to understand, dive deeper into that original justice. Know there was a time when those who went before you experienced and lived original justice, when all was ordered to the will of our Father. And that gnawing inside of you is that gnawing to order your life to the will of our Father. Is that clear, Seppi? We're going to start to talk about how God exists. This is just a short review. And God exists. For our purposes, God has a will, God has an intellect, and God has a memory. That's all I want you to know. God has a will, intellect, and memory, and you have a will, an intellect, and a memory. Creation was made originally. We were thrust into existence. You caught that in those other tapes. We were thrust into existence. We weren't consulted. Nobody came to you and said, would you like to be created? We were thrust into existence. That's kind of important. We were chosen by God, and we were created in the image of God. So we have an intellect, a will, and a memory. I really don't want to debate that. I'm a map reader, and I'm telling you that was what was on the map in the 1500s. You read John of the Cross, you read Teresa of Avila, that's there. You read the writings of traditional, the wisdom of traditional humanity, that's going to be there. And I don't want to spend 54 years of my life recreating and reinventing and defending the wheel. So I'm just proposing. But I want to tell you that was there. There came a time when this original justice, when there was an ordering, that it ceased to exist. Things were disordered, and that we call the fall. And that disordering came about what we call original sin. And there are effects of that original sin, and you're feeling them now. Then, in response to that fall, we have God perforating, coming into our existence with a Redeemer to bring us back, to fix that break, to fix it. And that's the Redeemer, Jesus Christ. And then once the break is fixed, there hasn't been a full restoration, we have the Sanctifier, the Advocate, the Holy Spirit. So then you've been fixed, there's a repair, you have a relationship with God, but it's not quite where it's at before because you thirst. You thirst, you lack something, and you sense that through your hunger and your thirst. When you drink a glass of water and you're satiated, your thirst is slacked, you have no desires. Well, when you have that desire for something you know not what it is, my proposal to you is that's God. That's God knocking, and that's a DIY, do-it-yourself type analysis, and that's the Holy Spirit coming to you and saying there's more to life than what is your ability to experience. There's a mystery out there, okay? Now, for our purpose, God's will processes. So all is ordered to God. God's will processes out, diffuses out into the world. And it's acts of loving and charity. It's acts of loving and charity. God's will processes out there and diffuses into the world. There's constant blockers to that. But if I take a drop of red dye and I put it in water, in a jug of water, it diffuses. That's the law of diffusion. It is absolute. Try to tell that drop of red dye, don't diffuse. People will laugh at you. It has to diffuse. It's the same way with love. And it's the same way when you love or God loves, it's going to diffuse. But there are blockers, and we talked about that. The dominion of the lie, the empire of injustice, that clamshell holding the air bubble way down deep in the ocean. We remove the clam, that little air comes to the surface. There is a second procession from God for our purpose, and that's acts of knowing. And I think it's Professor McElhaney, I'm not certain, from Notre Dame or University of Chicago, talks about a new instance of self. When you come to know in a way that you didn't know before, that is a new instance of self. That's why teachers have always been revered. So you take somebody that doesn't know how to read or write or doesn't know the alphabet, and in a process of several months, they learn to put together, assemble letters of the alphabet, and then they can write. The person they were died. There is a new instance of self. A new instance of self. And that, I don't know if that's theological, but philosophical, that's how that professor was presenting it. That's how powerful teaching is. Because you begin to grow and you begin to become more than what you were. And just as we see lobsters or crabs get rid of their shell because they're growing and come into a new one, that's what's happening with you. That is what is to take place in your life throughout your life. Constantly grow, constantly knowing, constantly loving, and you'll have that peace that is beyond all understanding. And you've seen it. So, loving the will loves, intellect understands, that's the action of the intellect, and its object is truth, and it processes, the intellect processes truth out. I want to just, my little notes here, I want to get this right. We want to now observe God. I want you to process, not just accumulate these facts, process. We can look at God. Without cracking a book on theology, we can look at God and say, what do we observe? We know, if we accept what's been revealed, God created. When He created, and you can look up in the book of Genesis, what's the first thing we can comment on what He created? Remember, we don't want to go down and debate what is it that is uncontested on the main traveled portion of the highway. God created. The next thing we can say about His creation is there's distinctions in creation. There's distinctions. And that distinction that comes to my mind is angels and men and women, angels and humans. That's self-evident. Now we want to revisit these angels and humans for a very purpose, because in this discussion here about original justice, I want a subtopic to understand distinctions. Not everything is equal. Not all people are equal. Not all stars at night in the sky are equal in their brilliance and their luminosity. So, freeze frame, remember we looked at that distinction. Angels and humans. Look at the angels. There's 9 choirs there. There's 9 choirs. Each is distinguished from the other by their ability to love and know. Their ability to love and know. There's some good news in here. This is good news for hope. For those who don't understand, follow the argument here. We know we have distinctions. We know that we're told that angels exist in these different choirs. The question becomes, well, what's the bottom of the bottom of the heap there? Angel. What's the top? Seraph. What's below the seraph? Cherub. In my mind, I would ask, well, what's the difference between the seraph and the cherub if they're both loving and they're both knowing? They're both loving. They got two wings and they're both flapping their wings. They're both loving and knowing and they're hovering over God's will. Why do we have one or the other? I was not the first one to ask that question. I found the most clearest answer in Thomas Aquinas, and I'm going to give you my interpretation on that, and you're welcome to go there and look at the choirs of angels, and distill from that. But here is the hope that I give you, which is so powerful from a Carmelite point of view about loving and knowing. I want to suggest for you the answer. That the cherubs have two wings, love, and for our purposes, they're loving and knowing. Those wings are of equal. There's equal. The wing of loving and the wing of knowing is the same. They love what they know. They love what they know. Remember in the prior tape where the Dominicans were geared up to talk about, teach about it, because they knew that you couldn't love what you didn't know. Remember that? So they wanted you to come to know God. That's not the Carmelite take. But that's the Dominican take. You have to know, therefore you love. And that's the cherubic love. What do we have with Teresa of Avila? Seraphic love. We have the seraph in the image at the Vatican where the trident is coming into her heart. And she had the ecstasy. And she had union with God. Big union with God. What do you think the seraph does? The seraph still loves. And the seraph still knows. Loving and knowing, but the seraph is loving beyond its knowing. It's ardor, A-R-D-O-R, ardor of love. The flame of love exceeds its knowing. It loves beyond understanding. That's maybe where you're at. You don't understand. Don't be limited by your understanding. You love beyond your understanding. God is screaming to this age that do not accept the tyranny of the possible. Do not accept the tyranny of the possible. Original justice, we know that it was where we were to be at, is to be oriented towards the will of God. That may be a mystery for you. You're going to end up oriented towards the will of God. You may not always have to understand how that happens. And one of the things that John of the Cross will always say to somebody is two things. One, if God asks one thing of you and you do another, how does that help you? How does that enrich your soul? If God asks one thing, you do another. More importantly, is that when you're loving, you don't always have to limit your love to what you understand. And that God can infuse love and knowledge at the same time. But Carmelites do not limit their loving to what they know. They are obedient. They do the will of God, and they don't understand always. It can be a mystery. You'll hear things like keep the rule, and the rule will keep you. But you use your common sense. I'm thinking that most of you are not in a religious order. You're lay people out there. You love by a way you know, and you go by a way you know not, but you love by a way you know not. Use common sense, but don't limit yourself. If God says He's going to have you do this, He will, He will produce it. You have to trust in that. But that is what I want to leave you with. It is seraphic love, a greater love, to be in some form of lack of knowledge and still love, not fully understanding, not accepting the tyranny of only doing what's possible. Being a hero. Being a hero. It starts with original justice. It ends with original justice. And you are now putting on, you're getting up and moving along that way. And you may have tons and tons of darkness, fog set in. You be true to your prayer. You practice virtue, patience. And at some point the fog will lift. You do good even though you don't understand. You love those people who have done wrong to you in your family. You love, and that doesn't mean that you have to give knives to people who have a history of cutting people. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about a love. They're hungry. You put some bread out. If you can't put the bread out, you give it to the neighbor to put the bread out because they might not want to talk to you. It's a special season. It's their birthday. You can ask a friend. They don't have to know it's you. But you orchestrate that feeding and that loving and that knowing to someone that has not been good to you. That's loving beyond understanding. That's loving in a fog. You see no return. Darkness is there, and you still respond with love. That, and they may not even know Jesus Christ. They may not even have the same faith as you. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you cold? Loving beyond understanding. Now, that's how we unbundled original justice. And that's not always a positive. People don't want to talk about law. They don't want to talk about a lot of this stuff. And we're not talking about social justice warriors. I'm not talking about, I'm just talking about the concept of you and God knowing that seraphic love is not limited by understanding. That's very important. Carmel constantly lives in a world of ambiguity. We don't have to know everything. And John of the Cross would ask, how does that bit of knowledge, you've asked me a question, how does that bit of knowledge draw you closer to God? How, that could be curiosity. How is that bit of knowledge drawing closer to God? That's one of your discernment points. Sep, was this helpful, or is it pick it up?
Yeah.
The boss told me it's okay. We're going to cut it off here.